I would like to go over the assignment. Here you see a page that is advertising a supplement. Notice we have this phrase, show more. I'm sure you have seen similar things on the web. When I click on show more, I see some additional information. Notice show more changes to show less. When I click on show less, the information disappears and the text changes. So we have what I refer to as a toggle. We click to do one thing, we click to do the opposite. Now let's take a look at the generated HTML. You always want to use the browser's inspect tool to see exactly what your JavaScript is doing. Notice we have a little event tag next to our H2 element that says show more. That's because that H2, when clicked, will call a function. Notice the div underneath it has a class of hide. Notice it is grayed out. That is because that class is setting the display property to none so we don't see it. Now when I click show more, notice that my content is now all blue, which means it is no longer hidden. Notice we no longer have the class attribute inside the div tag because we have removed it with JavaScript. Notice that the text inside the H2 element has changed to show less. So I can click back and forth and I can see the results in my inspect tool here. And this is how you know that you're manipulating the CSS correctly, because that is the main way that JavaScript changes page layout and accomplishes a lot of the nice interactive effects that we see on the web. For the next part of the assignment, you will be working with a form. The purpose here is just to learn the JavaScript methods. In the real world, you would be using a database to do this. Here we have some customer reviews, and we are allowing the user to add a review. So if I place some text into the text box and click the Submit Review button, my review is submitted, and I can do it again and again. Let's take a look at the generated code using the inspect tool. We see that the customer reviews are enclosed inside a div element. And notice not only did I add the text at the end of this div, but the text is enclosed inside a p element. This is a little bit more than just using inner HTML. Inner HTML will overwrite the existing content. We want to not only add this content to the bottom of the existing content, but we want to enclose it in a p element. Therefore, we will retrieve the value from the form element, we will create a p element, we will append the content to the p element, and then we will append the p element to the div. Notice the div has an ID. Our button has an ID also, so those page objects should be easy to access. So you will be clicking on the button and calling a function that will retrieve the text, place it into the P, and place the P at the bottom of the div. We will also be clicking on the H2 element and calling a function that will check to see if a class exists and if it has a value of hide, and to add or remove that class as needed, in addition to setting the inner HTML properties. However, that H2 element does not have an ID, and you may not put one there. So you will need to use the appropriate DOM methods to access that H2 element on the page. for purposes of attaching a click event to call the function. So if you look at the CSS, this is the class called hide that we are working with. So I have the CSS selector .hide, which indicates it's a class. I have the display property set to none, which essentially will not display that content on the page. So looking at the HTML here, we see this class equals hide. This is an attribute. It is inside the div tag, and therefore that div and the p elements that are contained inside that div are not displayed. Once we remove that class, we will see that div and the p elements inside it. Notice that H2 is inside a section element which does have an ID. So this is a cue that we can use that ID to access uniquely the H2 because there are other H2s on the page. Just like we use descendant selectors in CSS, we do that also in JavaScript. JavaScript is extremely tied in to the HTML and CSS layout, and many times your CSS and HTML will be built in order to work well with the JavaScript. So this is our assignment, and I hope you enjoy it.